Hi, this is Henry Cobb, and this is my video in defense of the hovertank. Recently, Lindybeige posted a video about sci-fi tanks that turned out to be mostly about Steve Jackson's Ogre and GEV games. And as a third party who's just a fan of both of them, I thought it would be appropriate for me to bring up a few points about that background that make hovertanks not impossible, but rather inevitable. First, we all agree that the missile tank design is fine on the flat desert of the Ogre map, but if you bring it into the forests and streams of the GV map, it's definitely not going to work. It needs longer range and better cross-country mobility to be an effective unit. Nobody says, hey, let's bring in more missile tanks, and they'll do the job. But particularly, Lindybeige spent a lot of time talking about the hover tanks in that the GEV game is named after. And he seemed to indicate there were several problems with this. And I think if you look at the timeline going forwards that Steve Jackson points out, you will find that these actually fit in quite well. So first, why doesn't the war between the great powers end on the first day? Because they simply send over their ICBMs and they blow up all the cities. Well, obviously, what you do is what we're doing now, which is ICBMs come in and they're matched by missile defense, and wait a second, one of them came through, and well, there goes Detroit. Who cares? And then the next step is that you get more robust missile defenses that stop a greater percentage of the incoming ICBMs. So then the ICBMs come up with decoys and other penetration aids, like maneuverability, that would then evade those. So the final result of this conflict is that you get lasers, big lasers that are in fixed positions for the defense, and these go zap, 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 and shoot down all the ICBMs. You don't run out of ammo with a laser because it's just electrical power. And then you have to put these lasers up on towers so they can also hit cruise missiles that are coming in down below. They go zap, zap. And so that way you get complete coverage of the skies. The issue with this is that once you have all these lasers in place, then it's much easier for them to target fixed satellites. The satellite going by in a fixed orbit. Boop, goodbye. And here's a manned aircraft, which is a lot less maneuverable and a lot less ground hugging than the cruise missiles. So that's also gone. So you have a future there in which countries are the defense of countries is based on items that eliminate orbital and air assets. So what happens to the Air Force, or more generally, Army helicopters? That have they have that scouting role, and they've got the armor attack role, and they keep track of the enemy because you don't have the satellites keeping track of the enemy either. So you need a light scout force that'll go in there and it'll track down the enemy. And what you have is a hover tank that's then very close to the ground, so there's ground clutter in the way that blocks the lasers. And that's that way they can carry a bit more armor than a aircraft could, because they use the ground effect, you're right there off the surface, to provide part of their lift, and that way it takes less power to keep them, than it would be to keep them up in the air. And but Lindybeige says, well, you got a hover tank here, and it's going along. It's got a nice flat surface. It's perfectly fine. We might have a problem turning, and then it hits a ditch, and woo, off it goes, crash. And the answer to that is that you have battery power that temporarily boosts the fan power. So it's going hover, and then lift up over the ditch and onto the other side. And because electrical motors are pretty lightweight for their power output, you can, if you have sufficient battery power, you can take your default power and you boost it up with the battery power to provide you that extra effort of lift. Now, batteries are heavy, right? So what you need is you don't need the battery power to fly in the midair for hours and hours and hours. You're just going to be, a fraction of a second or a few seconds as you cross the ditch, and then you're back into a hover mode at your default power level. And so the way you do that is with capacitors, which have a very high power density, but they have a very low energy density. So it's not the total amount of energy you're drawing from the system, it's the amount of power. But, where are you going to put these capacitors? And my answer is to put them all around the edges of your hover tank. And so there's an air gap there. It's a very powerful capacitor, and you're stacked up multiple layers. And so any incoming round is then interrupting a capacitor. It's short-circuiting the capacitor, which means all that voltage immediately flows through the round and disrupts it. So you have built-in electromagnetic armor. So by taking an overall system design, you can have hover tanks that are effective and pretty inevitable once you look at the overall, hey, you know, there's lasers there that are shooting down all the aircraft and the satellites, and how do you know where the enemy is? You need scout forces, they need to be fast, hover tanks. So that's my defense of hover tanks, and I'd like to see your thoughts. I've got links below that have for both Lindybeige and Steve Jackson in case you want to consult one of those sources. Thank you.